In this video, I'm going to talk about 6 baby steps that can be used to help implement standards-based grading within a course. My name is Courtney Faber, and I'm a lecturer and research assistant professor at the University of Tennessee. So first, what is standards-based grading? So standards-based grading is a grading mechanism that places emphasis on learning goals. And these learning goals can be content-centered, skills-centered, or standard-centered. And this grading mechanism allows for the assessment of students' level of mastery on each learning goal. And one of the major benefits of standards-based grading is that it provides unique connections between learning goals, assessments, and feedback to students. So it makes sure that there's synergy between the learning goals in a course and the assessment that an instructor is using. So while there are a number of benefits associated with standards-based grading, there are a few challenges that an instructor can face when implementing standards-based grading. So first, it can be very overwhelming to restructure a whole course using standards-based grading. This often requires a significant amount of time and a lot of effort in that this grading mechanism is different than a traditional grading structure. It can also be overwhelming and new to students within the course. So when a whole course is restructured 100% using standards-based grading, some students may push back because it's different than the traditional grading structures that they're used to in their other courses. And they may not fully understand why that one course is using a different grading mechanism. So there are a number of different ways to use standards-based grading in a course, and we often talk about and see implementation of standards-based grading within a whole course. And typically, when this implementation is designed, it's done all at one time. So an instructor would take time, restructure the entire course, and then that semester run the course with standards-based grading across the entire course. But this isn't the only way that standards-based grading can be used. We can also use standards-based grading for one assignment within a traditionally graded course. And this can be connected to the other goal of implementing standards-based grading in a whole course, and it might just be step 1 in that. So initially you may restructure one assignment in your course to use standards-based grading, and then over time restructure other assignments within that course to use the same grading structure, so that over a period of time your entire course now is using standards-based grading. However, it doesn't have to be used to result in implementation across the whole course. And today I'm going to focus on the use of standards-based grading for one assignment within a traditionally graded course, because one of the major reasons many instructors may be hesitant to switch over to standards-based grading is just because of the overwhelm and all of the challenges that are associated with moving an entire course all at once to standards-based grading. So I've broken this process up into 6 different steps that could be used to implement standards-based grading on one assignment within a course. So first, select the assignment. 2, construct goals for the students. 3, break these overarching goals into smaller objectives to inform assessments. 4, revise overarching goals and assessments. 5, make rubrics. And 6, design an overarching rubric to calculate grades. So I'm going to spend the next few slides going through each of these steps independently. So first, selecting an assignment. So this could be a single assignment or a series of assignments within a course. And you may initially want to select something that's distinct from other course assignments. However, this isn't necessary. So for me in my course this last semester, I identified a project that was focused around the grand challenges. And this was a design challenge and a multi-week design challenge for a group teams within the course. And so this project was unique from other projects within the course and other assignments within the course. There were some overlapping concepts between this project and other projects within the course. So the second step is to construct overarching goals. So to begin doing this, you may not know exactly what the overarching goals are for your assignment. But to begin to take a stab at it and get started, think about the question, what do I want my students to take away from this assignment? So when you're doing this, don't judge what you write down at this point, just put ideas on the page, because this process can be fairly challenging and overwhelming. So just get ideas on the page. This process of developing standards-based grading for a single assignment is very iterative, so it's not, I'm presenting these steps in a linear manner. However, you're going to come back to these steps over and over. So it's not like once you move from step 1, you can't come back. So just get some starting point write a couple different goals that you might have for your students across this assignment that you're looking at. So for my NAE Grand Challenge design project, I had 4 different goals, and I'm going to show 2 of them right now. So the first goal was to connect the problem statement to one of the NAE Grand Challenges, and then the second was to implement the steps of the engineering design process. So you see from looking at these examples, these are fairly broad goals, and they're not necessarily measurable at this point, but that's okay. They're helping us frame the later steps that we're going to go through within this process. So step 3, here you're going to break your overarching goal into smaller pieces. So initially, you're going to start by reviewing the overarching goals that you have. You want to think about what your students need to be able to do in order to accomplish each of these overarching goals. And then you want to begin to identify how these smaller objectives can be incorporated into instruction and the assignments. Because remember, one of the major benefits of standards-based grading is that there is integration between learning objectives and the assignments and the instruction. So looking at one of the objectives that I laid out, so connect your problem statement to the NAE Grand Challenges, I identified 3 different components that students would need to be able to do in order to accomplish this larger goal. So the first is to read the NAE Grand Challenges. The second is to identify at least one NAE Grand Challenge that's connected to the problem statement. And then third is to justify how that problem statement is connected to the NAE Grand Challenges. So here, if you look at these smaller objectives, these are measurable. They have an action verb, and they are much more specific than the overarching goal. So this is kind of what the ultimate goal of this process is. So to break down those larger overarching goals that might be fairly nebulous initially into smaller components that you could incorporate into instruction or into assignments within your course. So step 4 is revise. And so you want to review here your list of your overarching goals and all of the objectives. You want to ensure that your objectives are measurable. So often one easy way to begin to do this is to make sure you include an action verb within your objective and that the objective is as specific as possible. And you also want to make sure that as you're reviewing these objectives and your overarching goals, you want to make sure the scope is appropriate. You want to make sure you've included all of the goals that you have for your students on the assignment, but with that too, you want to make sure you don't have too many goals for your students. So if this is a 1-week design challenge, you wouldn't expect to have 10 large goals for your students. So for example, the project that I used to move over to standards-based grading, it was an 8-week design challenge, and there were 4 large overarching objectives for that assignment. So with this, during the revision, you're likely to revisit this step many times, even after you initially implement this in your course. So one thing to kind of keep in mind with standards-based grading and any type of instructional changes is you're never done. The first time you implement it within the course may not be the best time, and it's a learning process. So don't be too hard on yourself if it doesn't go the way you intended initially. During the revision stage, this is also a great time to use other resources that you might have access to. So this could include colleagues within your department or your program, other campus resources, and then also the standards-based grading hub. And I'll have that link to that page later on in the presentation. So step 5, the next step is to write out rubrics. So for this process, there's no single way to go about doing this. You could have a rubric for each of the objectives that you've outlined for your assignment, or you could have a rubric for each sub-assignment. So for my specific project, this project was broken up into a series of sub-assignments. So for me, it made the most sense to take each of those individual sub-assignments and make a rubric for that. And that's just worked the best for me. So with that said, make sure you're selecting what makes the most sense for your class, your assignment, and then how you're going to go about assessing your students. And then fine-tuning these rubrics is going to take multiple iterations. And often you're not going to know the limitations of your rubric until you use the rubric for the first time. Here's an example of a rubric for one of the sub-assignments within the larger design challenge that I used in my course. So as I talked about earlier, I had 4 different project objectives for my students. And these objectives are displayed. And so looking at this rubric for this preliminary assignment 3, the goal of this assignment was specifically to have students write a problem statement for their design challenge. So if you look at what is on the screen here, you see you have 4 different rows, and each row is associated with a different objective. So that's indicative of what a specific component of the assignment is going to be evaluating. So within this preliminary assignment, the students will be assessed on Objective 2, Objective 1, and Objective 4. So not all 4 objectives, but a couple of the objectives. And so just keep in mind, this is only one of the rubrics. So I had multiple rubrics for all of the different sub-assignments associated with this project. And the scale is just something that worked for me. So going from 0 to 4 worked very well for me. But as you can see, I don't use the 4 to 0 scale for every single row or every single component of this sub-assignment. And I actually changed it depending on how extensive or how detailed that specific outcome that I was looking at was. So for example, within communication, it didn't make sense for me to have 4 or 5 levels of communication. It made sense for me to have 3 levels of communication. So for that objective, I only have 3 levels, whereas for looking at whether the problem statement is of appropriate scope, so this is within Objective 2, it made sense for me to have 5 different levels. And that actually is going to work out fine, and I'll show you later how this is going to get incorporated into a final grade. So looking at this rubric, you see overall it's graded out at 12 points. So after you've made all your rubrics for all of your different sub-assignments or your different objectives, you can begin to think about how to make an overall rubric for the assignment. So this part of the process allows you to provide detailed feedback using standards-based grading, but also determine a grade that can be incorporated into other course assignments. Because remember, the goal of this process is that we're going to just use standards-based grading for one assignment in our course and incorporate the grade from this assignment with other grades that are determined using traditional grading. So as you're thinking about making your overall rubric, think about how sub-assignments might be weighted or objectives might be weighted. So maybe think about if there's one that has higher priority than others. You would also want to think about tracking the objectives across all aspects of the assignment. And then determine a scale that can be used to convert the rubric score to a numeric score that can go along with the other traditional grades from the course. And this is a very challenging process, and there's not one single mechanism or way to make an overall rubric. I am going to show you one example that ended up working well for me. However, this is not the only example. So looking at what's here, first I wanted to show, just bring up that rubric for preliminary assignment 3 again. And then what's shown in the bottom of the screen is my overall rubric for the whole assignment. So if we look, you see in one of the columns for my overall rubric, I have a column labeled preliminary assignment 3. And these objectives, so the areas that are highlighted, correspond to the objectives that exist within the rubric for this assignment. So again, you can see I'm assessing Objective 1, Objective 2, and Objective 4 with this assignment. And then you see the rubric, remember, was out of 12 points total for this preliminary assignment 3, and this is also incorporated within my overall rubric. So the way I would use this overall rubric is once all of the rubrics for each sub-assignment for the project have been completed, I would then fill out all of the highlighted areas within this overall rubric and then calculate the totals down those rows. So looking at preliminary assignment 3, we're going to have numbers within the first row, the second row, and then the fourth row. And these numbers, if the student showed mastery across all of these objectives, they would end up with a 12 on this rubric. So we would then sum and write that score down in the highlight associated with the score. So we would do that for each of our sub-assignment rubrics. which would then give us a total score for that student on that assignment. We could then divide that by the total number of points for the assignment to get a percentage that looks just like a traditional, just like what you would get from a traditional grading structure. So this mechanism allows you to easily give your students feedback about how they're doing across the different objectives that are within the project, but it allows you to get a numeric score that can be incorporated within traditional grading. So one thing I want you to note while this overall rubric is up is you see that objectives are being assessed across multiple sub-assignments within this project. And that's something that's very important to consider within standards-based grading, is you want to give your students multiple opportunities to show mastery within a single objective. So with that, I have a few additional tips that I want to share with you. So first, you don't have to implement everything right away. You can pilot your standards-based grading while using a traditional grading structure. So say you develop the rubrics, but you're not feeling 100% confident in utilizing those rubrics initially. So you can continue on with your traditional grading, but have those rubrics for standards-based grading and use them simultaneously with the traditional grading and kind of see how they're going and make revisions and identify those limitations. So this allows a little bit more time to refine that grading process, and you could even identify a subset of students to share that feedback with in the standards-based grading format and kind of get their input so that you can make revisions based on what the students are telling you. Also, always reach out for support. This can be to your colleagues, the standards-based grading hub, or the learning center at your institution. This is a very challenging process. This is something that we're not all familiar with. It's not intuitive for all of us. So don't be intimidated if this is a challenging process for you, and consult other faculty. And they might not be able to help you. They might not be familiar with standards-based grading, but that's okay. They could still help you think through different aspects of the project and of the assignment and think about what those goals are and what those sub-objectives might look like. And then the last tip I have is to be very transparent with your students. So keep in mind, this is often going to be completely new to the students that are in your class, and some of them may push back because they're used to the traditional grading structure and they've done well with that in their courses. So make sure you're sharing your rubrics with your students, and then also let them know why you're using a different grading structure than what they've seen before and what you believe the benefits are, and help create a dialogue between you and your students. So with that, I just want to remind you to take one step at a time and to go through this process as slowly or as quickly as works for you.